Welcome, everyone. This kind of episode, I was very much looking forward because I have, on the other hand, in Chicago today, Amy Greyman. And Amy was, in her previous role, advising families of from significant wealth. And that is just from my perspective, just in other league of families. They have other issues, other challenges as families probably with 10 or 30 or 50 million. And in today's episode, we will dive in a little bit what these families are actually concerned about, what these families are actually raising on question, what kind of challenges they are facing now. And we will come to in broader picture what these families are actually also looking for on the advisor side, what kind of support they need, but also how they can move on a continuity base that they survive over the next 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 generations. So, Amy, it's my great pleasure to have you on the Global Wisdom Talk today. And can you give me and also the audience a little introduction to yourself? What is your background before we jump in?
Thank you, Jan. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. Um, so I am a lawyer by training who grew up thinking that's what she would do. And I found my way into the wealth business about 30 years ago. And I found my way there through starting as a trust officer at that point regional bank in the Midwest here in the United States. And it proved to be a wonderful place to start. Clearly, my legal background was beneficial to understanding the nature of trusts as contracts and the fiduciary risk and confidentiality and all the things that go with that. But I learned from the ground up through administration how things actually work. And to your introductory point, I worked with families in trusts that had $100,000 to a couple million. And as my career progressed, I spent more and more time with larger families. And over the last 5 to 7 years, worked in a large international bank, leading the global family office, where I had the occasion to spend time with families of what I call significant wealth, families with hundreds and hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, and therefore an enterprise structure, an enterprise mindset. And because of my career track growing up, if you will, in the fiduciary business, in the trust business, I really learned a lot about human beings in grief, under duress, in positions of power, positions of weakness and or perceived lack of power. And I've always been fascinating and brought all of those learnings along with me because despite structures and trusts and entities and businesses, at the heart of the work I've done and the work that your audience does is people. And people are human. And just because you're incredibly wealthy doesn't mean you still don't have the human elements and relational elements. So I have spent the last couple of years really honing in on that. And that was part of our discussion as you and I met and really understanding. So I am focused on that and spending time with families and advisors in that regard.
Great. So let's deep dive in our discussion today. I mean,
Wonderful.
I mean, the whole world is talking now, and it was also yesterday, and it will be talk also tomorrow about these $100 trillion wealth transfer. Everybody is talking about. And what I often missing is the part, who is actually talking about the family? Who is actually talking about the individuals of the family? The whole world is talking only and only about the money. What kind of sum moving from the boomer generation to the Gen Zs and to the millennials. And that is just in a discussion only in the direction of the quantitative capital side. And very few people address the issue, what about the family? If there is just a meteor, what I call these fortune, what is moving from one generation to the next, and the family member, maybe son or daughter, is sitting there, and he or she will see the meteors coming, but he or she have no clue when this meteor will hit in their life, and when it will hit, they have an integration issue because that is not theirs. It was not created by themselves. Maybe they have consumed from the fortune. And my question is to you: when do we have dealt with this families with significant wealth? What kind of discussions and conversations have you seen, for instance, between a couple or between a couple and their children? Also, in regards, what kind of discussion do you had with the families on these both pillars, the financial capital and also these human and intellectual capital? Have you seen that there's a shift if the new generation comes on the table, they raise other questions, say, yeah, the money is still there. Yes, we are focused on preserving the money, but we want to have impact. We want to use this kind of fortune for a greater purpose. Can you give us just a flavor on what kind of discussions or pictures, what have you seen?
Yeah, this transfer is happening, right? We know the boomers are now at 80, turning 80, I think this year, right,
Yeah.
is the front edge. So capacity, all of the things that we recognize as humans or as children about parents or grandparents, we get, we know that's coming and it's actually happening. Before I jump into your question, I think the only one of the few areas where I've really seen people start to dig in to the meat of this transfer beyond just the dollars and the capital, as you were saying, is women. There's been a lot of good conversation and awareness around the amount of money, which I've seen it's 30 trillion, 45 trillion. There's a lot of different numbers, but it's a significant amount of money that will be in the hands of women for the first time ever
Yes.
by 2030. And so as an aside and as a project and passion project of mine as a female in this business, I think that's very positive, and I think it is an incredibly big shift that is probably worth another episode. So I just to
Yes.
say that because that's the one place where I felt like there's been a little bit of qualitative attention to the transfer. But back to your question around the broader transfer and what this means in families, there was a lot in your question. I think there is more comfort. First of all, there are many families that I've seen or advisors or other partners with whom I've spoken. And there seem to be really two camps from what I can, and these are broad generalizations, but these are sort of trends I would say. Um, the families that are talking about the capital or the next generation has been exposed either through the business, through a job, through board seats or investment committees, right? There's sort of that quantitative conversation around the assets, and they'll be exposed to it. They will know about the different homes or vacation compounds or the properties, what have you. And then there are the families that are not really talking about it at all. And then you have some that I believe are rare that are having all of the conversations, the quantitative and qualitative. I do find that continuity is the goal here, right? Continuity with as little disruption as possible. I think that's a fair uh, goal for these families. So there are good conversations that happen about human capital. I often have found that they happen too late
Mhm.
and they happen once the decisions have already been made. So the structure has been built, the trusts are in place, the governance is in place and it's running. And then the conversations around the transition and the succession begin to happen, which depending on age and capabilities, that might be fine. But the buy-in that you get when you start having those succession conversations, I think is deeper and greater in the families where they've been part of the design or they've had a role or an opportunity to weigh in on parts and pieces of that structure. So it's just like any other, again, a human condition. Hey, I would like to, I want to buy into this. How do I do that? Well, when you own a part and you build a part or you contribute a part, it tends to, and there are just not very many families that I have seen. And if your viewers have more examples, that would be wonderful. It's just, it hasn't happened. And I think that the timing of those conversations is really important, but that requires thinking years and years ahead. And it requires advisors and advisory teams that are helping construct and remind and even guide families through some of those conversations. And I would just say the other thing is this is where some of the human element comes to play. And I've seen this quite a bit working at a commercial bank where, you know, the person who created the wealth in the company or has led that company and really been the face of it, it's really hard to start pulling away and transition that to somebody else or to even think about that. It takes some preparation mentally, emotionally, even spiritually, you know, to make those decisions. So it there are a lot of the business conversations and numbers conversations. There are some of these human capital family conversations. My experience has been that the timing is more important than we think, and it's often too late or very late in a process. So it creates a little more friction and I think a little bit more work to get people both successors and those moving on to figure out and build that. So that's a very long answer to your question, but it gives a little bit of the arc of what not only what I've seen but what I hear from colleagues and people I talk with about this exact topic.
If you allow me, just I will give you just the opposite. Maybe it's fair. It's unfair. It's not unfair, to be honest. The point what I want to make here is just yes, you described this clearly that is often too late. The question should be asked why. Yes, there are a
Why?
lot. Why is it just in many cases so late? Yes, there are a lot of emotions that the creator or the founder, because in many cases they have a great anxiety that they lose their identity if they move the fortune or the business or stuff like that. I came aware of, and that is just through many discussions, and we should also take care of, is just there's a greater proportion that the advisor ecosystem, what family use, is in some cases, not in all cases, the greatest risk for unsuccessful succession and for in handover. Why? Because most of the advisor work is only technical. contracts, trust frameworks, all these stuff. And I would call it, in many cases, the family moves into an illusion. Everything is clarified because we have a contract there, we have a trust there, and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, no family can live in a plan because because the family is evolving, is emerging, and stuff like that. And that is just a main point. Also, from my point of view, and I would be also happy if I can give you just my perspective and will hear what you think about, is just that we are standing on a crossroad now. The families of the future have very little in common with the family from the past, with the parent generation and grandparent generation and stuff like that.
Mm.
We have seen wealth transfer I mean, that is not new. Yes, the volume is new. The main point is that the new generation have a completely different interpretation what wealth actually is. It is not money. Yes, the money is just rocket fuel to achieve something. And also these main difference between the parent generation and the new generation, that the parent generation is mainly focused on preserving the capital. And the new generation, yes, preserving the capital is what is the right thing, but we want to grow, we want to have purpose, we want to have direct access, impact, all these stuff. Also, the family today and tomorrow, structure-wise, have nothing to do with the families what we have seen or we grow up. A man, a woman, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 kids. No, we can be lucky if the family of the new generation will have 1 or 2 children.
Right.
Right. And that brings me to the question, I will build up a bridge to you. I mean, you step out of this advisor ecosystem. What is your holistic view? What should be changed? Or in other words, from my point of view, there is change necessary on both sides of the table. On the family side, but also every family needs extraordinary and exceptional advisors.
Mm-hmm.
What should
Mm-hmm.
be changed on the other side of the table? If so-called technical advice is no longer more the main priority, because through AI, I could be wrong, I could be corrected. I mean, you could pull all what you want to have in Grok or ChatGPT, and you will get in response, right? What you need is just the shift on the qualitative capital side. So, what is your holistic view on these family wealth advisory ecosystem, the wealth managers, the trustees, and stuff like that? Can you open just a window for me? What is your outlook on this?
Yeah, it's very insightful, and it is something I've talked about and recognized that two things: the traditional approach to wealth management and taking care of someone through a life cycle of building and distributing
Yeah.
wealth is an interdisciplinary team, right? Different people with expertise usually pulled together by a generalist or a leader. And I think that is the right structure. When you have families of significant wealth, it's really exponential. And while, to your point, that technical is incredibly important, it's also in some ways table stakes. And it's what is layered on top of that technical skill is really the difference maker. And the structure of those teams can also be different. If there's a family office, you will have that structure within a family office, which is going to have as many different structural permutations as there are families, depending on what the purpose and need is. So there's an adherence to this multidisciplinary team approach that resembles what you need for families of significant wealth, meaning a think tank. But what you really need are also individuals who are comfortable in the relational space, who are highly emotionally intelligent and understand and observe and can even sense dynamics and movements and shifts. You need people who create an immense amount of trust and comfort for families to have and engage in conversations that will impact for generations, not maybe one generation or just for a lifetime, but significant and reputational impact, right, to families who have reputations and want to preserve that. So you need the combination of all of those things, and perhaps the most important thing in that advisory skill set that you layer on top that I'm describing is maybe it's fortitude, and it's the fortitude to have and guide these types of conversations. And what I have seen, even at very senior levels and very sophisticated levels of conversation and advice, there are still not many people who have the courage to look a very, in my old world, a very large client that generated significant revenue and say, you're wrong. They wouldn't say it like this, but the message is actually, that's not going to work. Here's why. Or I hear what you're saying, but here's what's continuing to happen in the family or in this situation. So what we're doing is not working. We need to think through a different pattern, a different action step, or we need to go back to the beginning, go back to square one and reassess what it is that we're trying to do. And that requires a different skill set. And I would even argue you don't even have to understand the technical side to be able to actually have some of those conversations. But when you can pull a person together with those skills, that is where the advisory and if you think about um, life, right? Life is going to do what life is going to do for all of us. Things change and move, and um, we wake up one day and suddenly we're dealing with something we didn't know. Well, that happens for these families as well. And then it's the magnitude of change when you have a large enterprise wrapped around that. It's just a significant volume of activity. And being able to operate in that system and maintain that core trust and transparency and translation for the key family members. It's just a very different way of operating, and it requires different skill sets and, quite frankly, a different work environment in many situations. So that that is exactly what you were talking about, Jan, is that there just isn't a lot of that conversation around and what I see in these families is, like you say, wonderful technology, wonderful technical skills, wonderful documents, great structures, wonderful PowerPoints and diagrams. But legitimacy of those comes in how they're used, how they're understood, how they are adapted. And there has to be somebody who's comfortable being in that space to connect those dots. And without that, that's where you have the gaps. And it's where advisors really differentiate and can make a difference. And I think you're right. The right structure for your team and who's on your advisory is really critical when you're in that space. And that industry is also growing and becoming incredibly complex. Uh, Consultants and family dynamic coaches and all kinds of things are happening in that space, as you know. And so it's for real.
Would you agree that if I say that actually the expectation of a family from significant wealth is if they're moving on each discussion, whatever the topic is, that they want that somebody say, wait a minute, that's wrong on that kind of matter. Let's step into a discussion. Why is it wrong? But here is maybe one or two solutions what I can provide. What I often see is because in many cases these principles or also the matriarchs, they are feeling lost because everybody is saying, yes, you are the greatest hero and stuff like that. But in some cases, they need somebody to say, wait a minute, if you move on, that is the completely wrong direction, right? Would you agree on this? And the question they are associated with is this also the main matter that the new generation will say, you was the advisor of my parents, not mine? Because I've seen a lot of what you have done with my parents. I am correct with this, or I'm on the wrong path?
Uh, I would agree with you. And it is so I've seen this and I'm also assuming it. So it's I think an educated assumption, if there is such a thing,
Yeah.
that the leaders of these family enterprises do at times feel very either alone or frustrated because they aren't getting the information. Just like any other CEO
Yes.
or high-ranking person, you get a lot of yes people, and you get a lot of people who might be afraid to interface at an authentic level. That yes, that requires some. That I think there's truth in that. I also think there are many of those people who are um, overly confident and suspicious of people. And it's hard to because they've been oriented towards that, or it's a personality or a trait that can make it difficult for them to find the right advisors or to listen and think differently. Um, that's pretty rare. I do find that they're quite open. It's finding that person or those people that can do that for you. Um, when we talk about the next generation, you've mentioned this twice. I didn't really cover this in my last answer, but I mean, I see this in my own kids, right, who are Gen Z, and we have a lot of fun family discussions, as I'm sure you and the listeners do, about, well, my kid, wants to do this or thinks it should be easy, or they think they should be promoted in the first 6 months at their job. Like there's a lot of that chatter, and it's typical generational
Yes.
um, friction, and it's
Yeah.
happened forever, and it will happen
Yeah.
forever, right?
Yeah.
That's going to exist, period, paragraph. Um, it's fun to talk about, but it's not going to go away, right? And I think there are a lot of misses when we talk about next gen and those generational um, preferences and orientations. Um, I'm aware of it as a parent. I'm aware of it in my work. It takes a lot to be self-aware of that because you have a natural bias to different things. Um, there is this strong, I think there are two things. They are very, and I'm proud of this, and I think this bodes well for the world and for all of us. Is that those generations, as you said, they want to have impact. And they're very particular about things that they're passionate about, and they connect their money and their spend and lifestyle to those outcomes. And so there's great authentic integrity in those
Yes.
generations. I think greater than mine. And the other Gen Xers can yell at me and disagree, but I think there's an incredible promise there. And shifting from this family enterprise and the continuity to more of outward impact or to visible impact is really a difficult shift. And it is, in my opinion, really wholeheartedly tied to this generational um, and to inertia and structure debt and how you've been doing things. So when you talk about bringing next gen in and or preparing for those transitions, it really requires a lot of work, and it requires more time and preparation to be integrating and bringing that to the table than most families and advisors are giving it. You know, I worked with a family, and it was one of the best examples of sort of having the kids, next generation, I call them the kids, the generation grow up in the family structure, family enterprise. And it was when they turned 14, they could attend the family meeting and were expected to attend the family meeting. They couldn't vote or they didn't have any, but just that exposure. One, they were going every year as part of their family, get-togethers, and they saw cousins and et cetera. So there was that component that was important to them and grounding. But they did a really good job of just having them there and in the ecosystem to hear, to see the advisors, to understand. Even if they didn't understand, they were hearing these phrases. And then as time went on, they formalized it. And there really needs to be some formalization to bring that generation in. Give them something, give them some money and have them give it to it, or build something. Give them a seat on the leadership council or in some formal family structure. Maybe they don't even vote.
Yeah,
Maybe they're ad hoc. I think, again, it is a sequence of activities and events, but there's a grooming and a preparation that comes through that. It also allows for some of that generational friction to be less
absolutely.
harsh. And so advisors, to talk about, for some of your what viewers, is those are the conversations that can be really, really impactful. And it's also because that takes time and it takes some patience and it probably takes some additional work to do those things. That goes back to the question I was talking about before, which is that's why it takes so long or it happens late. It happens in adulthood or sort of, and where I've seen it work really well with this family. And so now there's and I worked with that family for 6 years. And so I saw this one um, young man move from, like early high school through college. And he would just sit there. And then the next year he could see him talking to his parents. And then the next year he was talking to the advisors after the family meeting. And then eventually he was asking questions. He was looking at the portfolio. And it is exactly how you integrate, number one, back to your integration comment, and two, you start to overcome the harshness of a transition and generational friction. But it requires foresight and it requires thought.
I'm absolutely with you, and that is a brilliant example what you described, and it is just what I call this is just in a dynamic succession, right? It is not even
Yes.
it is not a project. It's just if today is the succession done, tomorrow starts the new path, right? And I would like spend a couple of minutes what we have today on the females, on the women and
Okay.
well, because that is just a topic what I came aware of in September or October last year. And I will give you just a picture. What I've done was I was asking myself, okay, what is actually the outcome of these $100 trillion wealth transfer? What are the shifts? What are the disruptive things what we will face in a very short period of time? And what I mean by this is just only a decade,
Hmm.
only 10
Hmm.
years. And the result was that we will see between 2,000 and 5,000 new dynasties over the next decade.
Wow.
And the most surprising fact to me was that approximately 40% of these new amount of dynasties will be female lead. And I said to myself, wait a minute, what's happened then? I mean, you mentioned this that I mean, you are a woman, I'm a man, and undoubtedly, and if you are lucky, you will live longer. And
Statistically, I'm supposed to, but we'll see,
statistically,
right?
but in real cases, you will be lucky enough. And the point is, in I mean, on the one hand, we see also what I call a democratization of wealth. We will see an exponential grow on families with significant wealth, not with 5 or 10 or 30 or stuff like that, with 100 and above.
Hmm.
And and what does this mean is just actually what I see often that women are in most cases unprepared. And if there is some preparation, it is only financial. What
Mm-hmm.
is a stock? What is an ETF? What is private markets and stuff like this? Why? I mean, if you don't have just other capabilities on the human and intellectual capital side, I mean, it's nonsense that you have this kind of knowledge. But it is not my point. Um, what is your projection? I'm correct that woman and wealth will be the new power force in this wealth ecosystem.
I I would argue that women have been a powerful force in the financial, but in a subtle, hidden behind the scenes way.
Yes, yes,
In a traditional marriage, there is that we've known for a long time, especially in the consumer, retail world in the United States, women drive the economy. They're buying the groceries.
yes.
Uh, they are sending their kids to the sports camps. They are paying the bills. Now, what I mean by that is that's a traditional model. Even in my family where I was the breadwinner, I was still driving a lot of that because if I worked, I actually spent more money. I hired someone to clean my house. I was having someone do my dry cleaning and, would occasionally have someone cook meals. So I would say that this is always, to me, this is a formalization, right? And a real, and I only say that because there is going to be a knowledge gap for many women who find themselves running their family money, if even at a couple $1 million up to these large amounts. Um, so there's going to be a need for education. But where I think it is going to, I think it will make a difference in a couple of places, to have women as the decision makers for so much wealth. I'd say it's going to be three things. Um, it's going to shift the advisor world. And for those watching, um, there's a need to have people want to work and see people at firms that look like them, and that they are comfortable with, and particularly women. So I think there are going to be a lot of advisors who now their clients and their most important clients are the spouses or the daughters or the nieces or what have you of their clients. And so even at the lower, mass affluent, but certainly into, so I think that's the one an area that's really incredibly important for advisors and those of us in the family advice ecosystem to understand. Two, women are different decision makers, and the information they're going to require and the way they make decisions will be very different. It is not, it will be less quantitative and have a more of a qualitative. And that has been proven over time that women do better in investing. Women run hedge funds, have better performance. Women, a study of women portfolios versus they do better. And they're less risk adverse and they're less enamored with the big deals and the big wins. So I think the way decisions and portfolios will be built and capital will be deployed for these very large families is going to be different. And thirdly, I think, and this goes to much of our discussion today on is, um, you know, this is not to reduce women to simply being mothers. There are going to be thousands and thousands of women who are not mothers who are going to be managing this. But there is a sense, I think, of greater awareness of this transition and who comes after.
Yes.
And they're just uh, women think differently about that. Not that men do not care for their families and how assets will flow, but the approach will be different and the decisions will be made differently. And I actually think the sequencing of what we talked about, the introduction and all of the transition, I actually think that will happen differently. And we will be thinking because that's how women are oriented, especially if you are um, responsible for a lot of the family business, the business of family, I should say, right, instead of family business. And what we've seen from women leaders, um, Finland um, and the names are escaping me, the Prime Minister of New Zealand and other female leaders, um, it changes the dynamic, and
Yeah.
and it will change the dynamic here. Um, so for advisors and for people in this large, significant wealth ecosystem, um, there's a real opportunity to position and work with these families of wealth, knowing that and paying attention to that. And there are a lot of companies out there and firms where if you go on their website, they are still predominantly men. The leadership is male. And that will also begin to shift, I believe, at a greater rate. Even though women are well represented in wealth management and leadership and in the family office space, not always. And I think you'll start to see that accelerate also as a practical matter. Um,
I'm absolutely with you. And if you allow me, I will give you just a snapshot on my perspective on this. I
I would
mean,
love
yes,
it.
yes, it is on the one hand that the money will, in the end of the day, flow in the woman's hands, right? That is what it is. The other thing is that structure-wise, what I mentioned, these families of the new generation, it is often the case that the spouse is also successful as the husband. In some cases, more successful as the husband.
That's
And
right.
and there are two scenarios. It's one that will increase a lot of tension in their marriage or in their whatever it is, because we as men, by and large, we have some problems if our girlfriend or our a spouse will be successful as we are. But on the other hand, is also the request how we can work together as a team,
Yeah.
as a very strong, powerful team. It is not no longer okay. Everything is focused only on the man, because he is the creator, right? And what you mentioned, the spouse is only organizing all around the kids and the grocery and the garden and the vacation and stuff like that. That will be not longer the case. I'm quite convinced about.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and the point is, what I see, what you also correctly described, is there are um, a greater awareness that we should support these females, but also in an isolation. And nobody is building the bridge to say, yeah, if we support you as a female, let's talk about how do you can collaborate as a team with your husband, your boyfriend, stuff like that, that you build up a team, and also as a result that you are a very strong and resilient family in the end of the day, right? And that is what I often missing, and that is also coming back to your point. Yes, we should take care of so many females and women with significant wealth also, but also to bring both sides on the table, say what can we do, and it is also necessary. From my point of view, the whole wealth management industry is completely blind on this.
They're pretty late to the game. They're pretty late to the game for sure.
Yeah, but on the matter, they are raising the question: okay, how we can make money on this? If there's no assets or stuff like that, it's only on the human and intellectual capital side, right? Maybe later on that we will get some assets, and
Yeah.
that is also in a direct implication that maybe some families will disappear through these wealth transfer itself, right? So that is just what I see in many cases, and that is requested to bring both sides on the table, and to help these families, right?
I would agree. I think you mentioned this earlier. Family structure is different, right? You're not, it's not a lot of kids. It's usually fewer kids. What happens now are children go to school sometimes very far away from home and they don't come back, right? So you have we've had geographic dispersion for the last, several decades. So that changes family dynamics. And you're exactly right. If we're talking about family wealth and family continuity, it's you might have different people sort of sitting in the lead, the wealth leader role, if you will, in that family. And I think more of them will be women. But to your point, it doesn't change the fact that this is still a family unit. And you've really pointed out another awareness, that even I was not as clear on, is it's not just the female shift, right? Because of the current demographics and activity, it's the family shift, which you see a little bit in the generation, but I mean, my kids talk about, I don't know if they'll have kids, right? Like before, it's an assumption that you're going to get married and have children. That is not really an assumption I can make
Yeah.
about my children. Um, and it's the same across that generation. So the whole family unit and quite frankly, even families of wealth, right? What it takes to raise a child now, not just dollars, but effort in and preparation and education at all levels has increased. So these are all things 100%, um, and it will be the to be flexible and to be aware of these changes in the family structure is really important. And it's not always going to fit into sort of the traditional governance structures that we've seen and operated in as well. So I think we'll start to see in our industry in this um, changes and innovations in how families are structured around these things that you're talking about.
Yeah, you are completely right. And when it comes to the governance, I mean, most of the governance framework was built for the parent generation. And it is a completely different approach what their parent generation have done. And you have described this also correctly, is we will see family there consciously decide we won't have children on different matters. It is our seriously decision. But if you have a fortune, a very large fortune, and you can see at this generation, Maybe you have a second generation, you have kids, one or two, I don't know. But you can see in the third generation, there are no kids, but you have a very significant wealth on the other side.
Yes. Yes.
It's just a question. And then it comes more in the focus. What can we do as a family of affinity? Because that is the only solution to, let's call it this way, to survive. Otherwise, entropy will take place on the table and you will gone, right? You will disappear. But building up a family of affinity requires also a strong leadership team, woman and a man. And it comes back to the point what I want to make. It is requested that we come as advisors more aware of, we need both sides on the table. We need, or we should encourage, empower both sides to work together as a team in a collaborative approach, right?
Yes.
So we come to the end for today, and I would be more than happy if we can plan a second episode, especially on this topic of the females. And before we jump out, I will give you just maybe a challenging question for today.
Okay.
If you imagine that you and I, we can have the opportunity to meet us in 500 years from now, and we put this in our diary, and you and I have the opportunity to look backward in 500 years from now, what is your perception? What should be changed and what will be changed in 500 years from now? Family-wise, maybe also, how does your family look like? And maybe you have sold other 10 houses or stuff like that. Yeah. Please let me know. What's your thoughts on this?
Wow, that is a challenging question. So I'll do my best, but it will probably
Please.
be shallow by comparison to the question. Um, well, I think what should change is what we've talked about is advising and building for the entire person and the entire family dynamic, and that um, I also think what should change is that while taxes and profitability and performance of the deployment of capital and investments is important, it's not all important. And so that should change, and that should be this collective. I think there should be more movement of wealth and opportunity for others to enjoy. I think these wonderfully large families um, that have generations of wealth and have done amazing work at preserving and continuing that family is does a lot for it does good for the world. I don't know any of those families that are just using that money for the worst things possible,
Yes.
right? It is a good thing, and should be nurtured. And if that can happen to more families, or more wealth can find their way into hands of thoughtful people, that should happen. And I actually think that will happen. Uh, to answer that, I think one thing that will happen is AI and technology will continue to shape the realities of how the work is done on a daily basis. Um, I know we're kicking and screaming about that as a human race in many ways, but that will continue. I firmly believe that, and I think innovation and the use of our brain power is a good thing. I would also say that the awareness of the impact and will there will be impact, and who's going to lead through that will be interesting, and it'll be interesting, and certainly in families of wealth, how they use that to continue the family wealth and deliver the good. And I will also say that I do think it will be less male and outcome centric, which is, where we live right now. I think it will change over time. Whether we think those are all good or bad things or positive or negative or what have you, I think is um, can be varied, but that's a very quick prediction
Great,
slash thought
great,
process
great.
on that challenging question, which I was not expecting. So
Yeah, that was the goal. That was the goal.
yeah.
That was the goal. But it's a beautiful outlook, and I've enjoyed it, and also enjoyed our conversation for today. And it is my wish, not my expectation, my wish that we can have a second episode very focused on the female. For today, many, many thanks. Best of the greetings to Chicago. And I hope that we will see us soon.
Thank you, Jan. Thanks for having me. It was great fun.